Well, it's now finally time to put this mount to work and do some imaging for the first time in a long time. And I've got what appears to be about 4 nights of some pretty decent imaging with no moon. So I am eager to get back out there and tackle that flying bat nebula and see if I can get some good oxygen data on the squid. I did this target when I first got the William Optics GT81. Turned out that I was shooting it right next to the moon, so that didn't work out too well. In addition to that, I'm going to go after the Lobster Claw, which I've never shot before, and the Heart Nebula, which I have shot before, but with the Red Cat 51. Let's go take a look at how I set up the imaging session for the next 4 days. Okay, we're in Stellarium, and the time is set to 8 o'clock, which is about the time when I can first start doing some imaging. Now, fortunately, the first target, which is the Flying Bat Nebula, and I've got each of the 3 targets marked here with these markers that I put onto the screen. And the good thing about the Flying Bat Nebula at this time is that it's just on the west side of the meridian, so I can follow it all the way down to the horizon if I want to. I think I'm not going to do that. I will follow it for 4 hours, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then when I get to about here, it's still high enough to do some imaging because I'm still at 40 degrees altitude. But instead, I'm going to switch back up to the Lobster Claw target up here and follow that down for 4 hours at midnight down to 4 a.m. and it's now getting pretty low on the horizon. I'm about 26 degrees. I don't want to go much lower than that, but I've still got some imaging time left. After all, it's only 4 a.m. so that's why I decided to throw in this third target, the Heart Nebula, and then I'll follow it for 3 hours, and then it's sunrise. Nominally 11 hours of imaging time that I can get on these 3 targets. In addition to planning things out in Stellarium, is also go over to Nina, because Nina allows me to actually see what's here. Many times you don't have a photo that goes with these targets. For example, if we go to the Lobster Claw Nebula here and turn on the ocular for the GT81, you can see that there's nothing in here. There is, in fact, the Bubble Nebula right here, but you don't see the Lobster Claw. So that's why it's good occasionally to go over and make use of the framing assistant within Nina, because then you can really do some fine-tuning of your aim position here. I'm going to go ahead and load the coordinates in from Stellarium, and Nina will load up the image based on this sky survey. In my case, I've got the camera rotated 90 degrees, so I'm going to put that in. And this would be the nominal framing if you just selected the Lobster Claw and said go to that target, and sure enough the Lobster Claw is in the middle of the screen. But I think with this field of view that the GT81 is giving me with this camera, there's an opportunity to capture a few more items. For example, I've got the Bubble Nebula right here, and if I shifted this Lobster Claw up, I've got an open cluster over here, the Bubble Nebula here, and it looks like NGC 7538. Now let's just recenter the image so we can make some final adjustments. As I move this window around, the RA and DEC coordinates of the center of the image are moving as well. And so you can see that we can try to capture this open cluster here. We can get the Bubble Nebula easily, and we can get this NGC 7538, the large protostar target up here. So actually this can make a fairly nice image with a lot of interesting elements to it. And then when you get done setting this, you just say add as a sequence target to your list of targets. And now let's go over and I'll show you what my sequencing looks like. We won't spend too much time on it, but basically I've got the Flying Bat Nebula, I've got the Lobster Claw Nebula, and I've got the Heart Nebula here. And what I do is fill in these for the different filters that I'll be using, and then the first night I'm going to concentrate all on oxygen 3 because it's such a difficult target. The squid part of this target is very difficult to get. Then I'll go over to the Lobster Claw and I'm going to do all HA on it, and then over to the Heart and I'm going to do all HA on that. I prefer to use, when I can, just use one filter for as long as I can, just so I don't have to always do an autofocus run after I change the filter. So that's what my imaging sequence looks like, and if the weather holds, I have 4 days, 4 nights to do this imaging, and I'll check in with you in just a little bit to see how we're doing. Alright, so I'm 2 days into the imaging here, and you can see I've got the directory open where all the subframes are going. This is the last image that I just got finished taking this morning at 7 o'clock on the Heart Nebula. Just scroll down through all the files to look for a consistent temperature. This is how I first noticed when my fan stopped working on my ASI 1600. All of a sudden I was going along at the -10°C that it's set to record the temperature at, and then after the fan stopped working, the temperature started creeping up. And so it's a good idea to just scroll down through your files and see if you're getting a consistent behavior out of this, and it sure looks like it's holding the 10 degrees C fairly well. There's a little jump up to 10.5 C, but that's not a big deal. It comes back down, and sure enough, throughout all of the images, and there's about a couple of hundred of them, over the past 2 nights now, the temperature has stayed constant, and all the data files look consistent. The number over here is the half flux radius recorded by Nina, and I put it into the file name, and there's no number that jumps out as being out of family with what we're seeing here. We're seeing numbers in the 2.0 to 2.2 range, and nothing really huge jumps out like some big guiding anomaly, for example. So let's go over to PixInsight and take a look at some of the Lobster Claw data. Nothing has been calibrated with flats and darks and all that. This is a frame. We're just going to step through it, let it run, and you can see the Lobster Claw here. You can see the bubble nebula here. The open clusters are down here, and we have our NGC 7538 protostar up in this area. So I think the framing is actually going to work out pretty well here, and I'm certainly capturing the Lobster Claw. I'm sure there's going to be some nebulosity that I'm going to be cutting off out here, but I did want to get the bubble nebula and the Lobster Claw, and then this is just a bonus coming out through here. So if we just zoom in on these, you can see all of the images are doing fine. Now it appears that I'm doing some dithering here. That's not the case. When Blink reads these file names in, it's using the file name to define the order, not the date which the files were taken. So what you're seeing are the lowest values of half-flux radius going down to the worst values of half-flux radius, and those are kind of occurring at random times. We can see here that the star shapes are very good, which suggests that the guiding is doing exceptionally well, and after all, that's kind of the whole point in getting this EQ6-R mount. Well, as we saw with the data coming in from the Lobster Claw, we're getting pretty good guiding, and I am pretty pleased with the mount's performance just right out of the box here. I haven't done any tuning to it yet. You can see that I'm getting roughly about 0.6 RMS total, which is pretty good. There's 0.5 RMS in the RA axis and 0.4 in the deck. I think I can still do some tweaks to the parameters. I'll wait till the moon comes back before I start playing around. I am using the multi-star guiding through the off-axis guider, and that's working out pretty well as well. So all in all, things are looking good from a guiding perspective. And from an autofocus perspective, I think I can cut down significantly on the number of autofocus runs. You can see from the first night, this is every autofocus run I did on the first night, and there was a temperature change of about 6 degrees C, but you can see the focus point is pretty much hanging around right here in a very small area. And then on the second night, the temperature change was only about 4 degrees C, and here we have a much tighter grouping of the data. And once again, I'm doing all these autofocuses, but the focus point is actually shifting very little, just about 4 focuser steps per degree C change, and that's not much. I could significantly reduce the number of autofocus runs here because the temperature isn't changing enough to cause me to really have to do this. And again, that's another advantage to sticking with one filter for a long period of time. For example, you can see on the first night I did oxygen 3 on the flying bat, and then for the other 2 targets it was all HA. The second night I kind of got some more oxygen 3 data on the flying bat, and then just used the rest of that 4-hour imaging period to get HA data, and then I went oxygen 3 for the other 2 targets. There was one anomaly. You always hate to wake up in the morning and see these big red boxes on your Nina screen, and basically what it says is that it did an autofocus run at midnight, and then when it did a confirmatory picture, it found that the half-flux radius was significantly higher than what the hyperbolic fit said it should be. And so it redid the run, and when I compare the 2 runs that it did at midnight, they are right on top of each other. So it did the red one first, and then it must have found, when it identified the optimum focus point, it moved the focuser back, took an image, and then found that it got a half flux radius up in here somewhere, and then that's why it did the run again, and I guess it was happy with the results after that. But it makes me wonder why it was having a problem, because these two runs, from an autofocus standpoint, there's nothing in the data here that would suggest a problem. And that makes me wonder about the guiding. And if in fact you go back and look at the guiding right there at midnight, there is an anomaly. Something is going on. When the guiding starts, that's after the autofocus run has completed. And so what's happening is the autofocus runs are completing back here, but there's still something going on in the deck axis, and the mount's just not correcting for it. That seems a bit unusual, and I want to go back and look at this same period of time for the first night. And you can see right there at midnight, now I'm switching from the Flying Bat Nebula up to the Lobster Claw, so it's done a slew, it's done the autofocus, and now it's starting guiding. And the thing it's seeing is that the deck is just not where it wants to be, and it's sending a lot of commands and not getting much of a response. And finally, it quote breaks free unquote, and it behaves well after that. Now, if I scroll over again on this first night, there is something that happens in here. And it appears to be the deck backlash compensation that's in PhD2. It seems to have made a correction, compensated for deck backlash, but when it did, it way overcompensated, and it swung it up here, causing a correction back the other way. And then the algorithm finally got that sorted out, and it settled down after that. And then for the remainder of this period here, the guiding was actually very good, and there were no other anomalies. So I'm guessing that this result here is because of the deck backlash algorithm trying to sort itself out. And this issue over here, I'm a little concerned about. It could be a mechanical issue in the mount, or it could be a cable snag. Either way, I've got to sort that out. Let's go take a look at the same graph from last night's imaging. So here we are. This is last night's imaging. I've got the scales set to the same here, but you can see it's taking a long time to sort out that deck problem here at the beginning, just after slewing to the Lobster Claw. After that, the guiding, once it sorts that out, the guiding is pretty good for the remainder of this period here. So whatever it is, there's something that seems consistent and repeatable going on after I slew to this second target. The thing I'll investigate tonight is whether or not I have a potential cable snag or some issue going on with the mechanical operations of the mount. On the side of the Skywatcher, you have the power cable. In my case, this power cable runs from here up into the ultimate power box. Then of course the power from there goes down to extension cord back into the house. And then you have this light here, this LED light, which is supposed to be constant if the power is stable. And what I'm finding is that this light is blinking. For example, if you look at this video here, this is taken in the morning after all the imaging. The mount is parked, nothing else is running, there's no other draw on the system, but I'm getting these 3 blinks and a pause, 3 blinks and a pause. So that's the other issue that I have noticed in using the mount. I've got some nice clear skies, good seeing, and no moon, which is extremely unusual. The guiding is looking pretty good for the EQ6. I know there's a lot of tweaking I can do with the parameters, but I'm not going to waste time on it right now with the sky conditions as favorable as they are. Based on some of the temperature drop, and very low temperature drop that's occurring overnight, at least right now, and the fairly stable behavior of the GT81 with respect to temperature, I'm probably doing a lot more autofocus runs than I need to, and I think I can cut those down quite a bit. I might also pump up the exposure time. I've been using 300 seconds for my narrowband filters. It's kind of been the standard. This is making me think I probably want to push that up to 400 seconds maybe, and get that pedestal even further off the low end there. I do have a deck anomaly that seems to be repeatable at midnight, just after slowing to the second target. There seems to be something that's catching, and the commands being sent to the mount to get it to respond in deck it seems to take quite a bit of time for it to, at least 5 minutes or so, for it to recognize and respond to those commands. So something is going on. I just don't know if it's a cable snag yet, or it's something in the mechanics of the mount when it's in that particular orientation that is causing it. So that's something I'm going to have to explore here before and during tonight's imaging session. And I'm getting a blinking power LED. The mount seems to be working just fine, but I don't think a blinking power LED is normal. So there's something going on. and I need to explore that a bit. If some of you have some experience having seen this, you might drop me a note in the comments, and I'll pull the thread on that. All in all, this first imaging experience with the EQ6 is great. Okay guys, well, I think that's it. Clear skies, I've got them, been needing them. I just needed 2 more nights, and maybe I can finish off these 3 targets, and I'll check in with you when we're done with the imaging session. See ya.